We are on to lesson 4, titled Beyond Personal Freedom. So good evening to everyone here in person and on Zoom. And let us get going here. Okay, so there we go. Beyond personal freedom. We're going to talk today about freedom, the Jewish value of freedom. Okay, well, what do you guys think? By raise of hands, here and on Zoom. Is freedom a Jewish value? Yes or no? What do you say?
Sure.
Yeah. Sounds like it's a Jewish value. What do you guys say on Zoom? Jewish value? Does anyone say no? Anybody for no that it's not a Jewish value? All right.
I'm not sure. That's how I define freedom.
Ooh, which that takes me to my next question. Very good. How do you define freedom? What does the word freedom mean? If you had to define freedom in one sentence, 5 words, 7 words max, that capture the meaning of freedom, what does freedom mean? What would those words mean? What would those words be? What is freedom?
Well, if you're talking about Passover, it's a whole different thing. Then, it depends.
So we have Passover, which is obviously very freedom-centric. But why do you say that it depends?
Because then, if you're talking about freedom, like, let's just do whatever we want. Let's eat trade. Let's do,
Oh, let's do whatever we want, right? Is it that? Is Judaism saying, okay, now you're free, you're out of Egypt, do whatever you want? Now you're not, you have no masters, you're not slaves anymore.
It's tricky.
Go enjoy life. It's tricky. Is that what Judaism stands for?
The
ability
to obey Torah.
Freedom to obey Torah. So religious freedom. Religious freedom is freedom. By the way, if you're writing comments, it's hard for me to see over here. So you got to speak up. Doug, did you have something to say? Doug?
No, I did.
Julie?
I was just going to say the ability to be able to express yourself.
The ability to express yourself. Okay. I know that I told you only have one sentence, and you did a good job in keeping it under one sentence. But what does that mean to express yourself?
As somebody else was saying, to live your life as you choose to live it.
Choose your life as you choose to live it. That's definition. Let everybody decide what they want to do, what they want to live, what they want their destiny to be, what they feel their purpose is, what they feel their mission is, what they feel, self-determination. Everybody gets to do whatever they want, and let them all do it. You don't like that. Why don't you like it?
That's not going to happen again.
Well, first of all, not everybody could or should do. What was that?
Community standards.
First of all, there's community standards,
Right,
and
right.
there's a certain degree. Okay, but even so, you could still say, as long as you're not too out of whack. But maybe not.
Maybe freedom is the ability to do what we should be doing, but we're able to do it.
Say it again. The freedom.
The ability to do what we should be doing without any barriers.
Without any barriers. Who determines what we should be doing? Every person to themselves?
Well, from a Torah point of view, you would say Torah.
You say that we got a whole program for you. Is that freedom? Okay, so what I want to share with you is like this. Today's class can be split into 2. And my plan is that part 1 should not be more than 45 minutes. All right? So part 1, which hopefully will end by 8:15, in 35 minutes from now, is going to be exploring the Jewish value of freedom. What is the Jewish value of freedom? And I could say it in one sentence, but I want you to have a deeper understanding of it. So I'll say it in 35 minutes. My father, when I was younger, my father would always tell me a line, which officially Winston Churchill said. Tell me to speak for 5 minutes, it will take me an hour to prepare. Tell me to speak for an hour, it will take me 5 minutes to prepare. My father would always say, less is more. Okay, but I want to share with you the Jewish value of freedom. And then in part 2 of today's class, we're going to talk about Jewish law. And we're going to see where Jewish law invokes the value of freedom, and in ways which are counterintuitive, in very unique ways, and how the Jewish value steers Jewish law. So let's get to it. And I want to begin our conversation about the value of freedom with a video. And hopefully those of you on Zoom will be at least able to hear the video. All right? But if you're having a hard time following the video, you could read text 1 while we watch the video. All right? So it's text 1 in your books on page 104. Yeah, you got a little bit of academic jargon here. Okay, but here we go. Here's a video, a legal case that takes us back to the year 1857, not that long ago, right, relatively speaking. And we're going to learn about a legal case which is known simply as Betty's case. You know about Betty's case? No? Okay, here we go.
Throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, people were brutally kidnapped from Africa and forced into slavery in the American colonies. By the mid-19th century, however, the United States was fiercely disunited over the practice of slavery. The southern states built their entire economy on the exploitation of people as slaves, whereas the northern states had abolished the practice as a contradiction to the right of every human to be free. This friction led to the Civil War of 1861. But just 4 years shy of the war, and just 8 years before slavery was permanently abolished throughout the United States, a Massachusetts court faced a slavery case with an unusual twist. The defendants were a white couple, Lewis and Laura Sweet, who lived in Nashville, Tennessee, where slavery was still legal and prevalent. During their travels, the Sweets were in the habit of taking along their black slave, a lady by the name of Betty. In 1857, the Sweets toured Canada and various northern states, but when they arrived in Lawrence, a city in the abolitionist state of Massachusetts, they ran into trouble. Local anti-slavery activists recoiled at the sight of a woman of color accompanying her white master and mistress. They demanded that the Sweets set Betty free. The couple claimed that they would not retain Betty against her will, but that Betty was not seeking her freedom. The activists then turned to Betty. They begged her to assert her rights and to refuse to return to Tennessee with the Sweets, but Betty brushed them away. One Lawrence activist, a widow named Lucy Schuyler, petitioned the Boston courts to intervene. The case, referred to simply as Betty's case, was heard by Massachusetts Chief Justice Lemuel Shaw, a deep thinker with considerable influence on the development of American law. Shaw requested the parties' consent to interview Betty in private. He reported,
I proposed and had an examination of the said Betty, apart from the said Sweet and wife, and all other persons, upon which it appeared to me that she is 25 years old, intelligent, and capable of judging for herself, that she has a husband in Tennessee and other relatives, that she is much attached to Mr. and Mrs. Sweet, is very well treated by them, and desires to remain and return with them. And this desire she expressed decisively, and upon repeated inquiries. I explained to her her right to freedom and protection here, and that she could not lawfully be taken away against her will.
The judge found himself in a quandary. Under the laws of his state, slavery was illegal and wrong. On the other hand, Betty insisted that she wished to remain with her masters. Betty's freedom appeared to be pitted against her free choice. Judge Shaw opted for the free choice argument.
It was contrary to all the principles of freedom that this or any other person should not exercise a free choice in such a matter. Betty was entirely at liberty to exercise her free choice, and no one could interfere with her without incurring a personal liability. Wherefore it was ordered and adjudged that the said Betty be at free liberty to remain with Mr. and Mrs. Sweet, or go elsewhere at her free choice, and that all persons be interdicted and forbidden to interfere with her personal liberty in this respect.
The underlying dilemma of Betty's case rings louder and lingers longer than an individual judge's decision. Should an individual be free to choose to be a slave?
So that is our story. So it's a very interesting story, very interesting case. And it becomes like this real conundrum. We're anti-slavery, but do you let somebody to choose to let go of their freedom? So what would you say? So we know what the judge did. The judge ultimately decided that she gets to choose, and that it would go against the principle of freedom if the court would force her to not be a slave. Do you agree with that?
I do.
You do. Let me ask you a question. The activists in Tennessee, not in Tennessee, Massachusetts, right, wrong state, wrong side. Were they happy with do you think they were happy with the judge's decision?
No,
Why not?
because they felt that slavery is wrong, and even if somebody chooses it, it's probably that person's poor thinking.
And so the community is imposing its own judgment.
Yeah.
And so there's some fundamental things as a precept as a society that we will impose on you. And one of them would be, you may not exercise your free choice in certain ways,
Right,
not to commit murder and not to be a slave.
right. So here's what I want to share with you. So we see over here, it's a little bit complicated. And you also have to realize, on the one hand, it's easy to say, let her choose whatever she wants to do. We have to realize, once she leaves the northern states, she does not have a way out. So she's making a choice now, and right now she gets a choice, yes or no. But this does have long-term consequences. It's very possible this will be her last opportunity. She's only 25 years old. It could be this will be her last opportunity for her family, for her husband. Right? Sounds like from the video she had a husband and children. This will be her last opportunity to leave. So it's a very big deal. She's forfeiting something for the entire future. At least, as far as we can know. We don't know if she'll ever have an opportunity again. So what this leads us to is, how do you define freedom? How do you define freedom? How do you define liberty? And I want to share with you, and this is a little bit more of a philosophical idea. It's a little bit deep. There are two ideas within freedom. There's a debate. What is freedom? And the two definitions are, I'm going to put it up here on the screen. One is called negative liberty, and one is called positive liberty. Negative liberty, positive liberty. What's the difference? Let's read this text, and then we'll discuss. Page 106, text 2. Would you like to read, Stuart?
Okay.
Not that many options here. So you got to carry it for us.
Negative liberty is the absence of obstacles, barriers, or constraints. One has negative liberty to the extent that actions are available to one in this negative sense. Positive liberty is the possibility of acting, or the fact of acting, in such a way as to take control of one's life and realize one's fundamental purposes. The idea of distinguishing between a negative and a positive sense of the term liberty goes back at least to Kant, and was examined and defended in depth by Isaiah Berlin in the 1950s and 60s.
All right, so we have these two concepts, negative liberty, positive liberty, a very big philosophical, the discussion. By the way, random fun fact, Isaiah Berlin, he was a Jew. He wasn't religious, right? 50s and 60s, he was a direct descendant of the Alter Rebbe, of the founder of Chabad. So, okay, that's just an interesting fun fact, Isaiah Berlin. So Isaiah Berlin is really the one who's credited of explaining this concept. There's really two definitions of freedom. And what you'll see is that depending on what you feel is a dominant definition of freedom, is the main point of freedom, actually changes the way you look at everything. And I don't want to get into it, but most people I don't think realize this, but an undercurrent of a lot of the modern day debates, between liberal-leaning stances on different positions versus conservative-leaning positions, really boils down to negative liberty or positive liberty. But I'm not going to get into politics. I'm not getting into any current events. If you want, you can have a good time Googling about it, all right? But we're not going to talk about it here, but I'm just saying this really does change a lot depending on what you feel. So let me explain to you a little bit what it is. Negative liberty. What's negative liberty? Is freedom from. That's the word, freedom from. Which means there's nothing there that's stopping you. Nothing there that's inhibiting your movement, your choice, your expression, whatever. Or in other words, if you look in the text over here, 3 words. Absence of obstacles. No obstacles, you have negative freedom. There's nothing negative stopping you. That's negative freedom. And I think that's what most people think when they hear the word freedom, right? Yeah, there's nothing there. There's no master, there's no tyrannical government, right? Okay. Positive freedom is, and look closely, it's freedom to. It's not freedom from, it's freedom to. It's positive. What could you do? It's the freedom to choose one's destiny and purpose, or in the words of the text over here, positive liberty is the possibility of acting. You have the possibility to act. Freedom from and freedom to. What's a practical example for this? Ready for a practical example about this? When a government tells you that you have the right to free travel, you could go wherever you want, you could leave your house at any time, no curfews, you could get in your car and do whatever you want. We're used to such governments, right? Thank God we don't live in one of those European countries that when COVID came, the government literally limited your movement. So we have freedom of movement, within the United States. Okay. Is that freedom from or freedom to?
From.
Freedom from, right. Is that negative liberty or a positive liberty? Negative. It's negative, which means there's no outside force stopping you from doing something. Okay. But let's say the government gives you freedom of movement, but you happen to live somewhere where there's no roads. And therefore, even though you have freedom of movement, practically, you don't have the possibility of acting. You can't go anywhere. It's just, your car's going to get stuck. There's nowhere to go. That means that you're lacking positive freedom. You have negative freedom, nothing is stopping you, but you don't have the possibility to act. That's the difference. Does that make sense? Is that simple enough? And there's many more such examples. Here's another example, which I believe is the one that Isaiah Berlin gave. Ready for his example? It's also a simple example, but it's a little bit more nuanced. Imagine you show up at an intersection. And there's no police, there's no red lights, there's no stop sign, there's no other vehicles. You currently have what form of freedom? You have freedom from. You have negative freedom. Nothing is stopping you. But Isaiah Berlin says, let's say you have a very important doctor's appointment that you're late to, and you have to make a right turn. But you are addicted to smoking, and your addiction to nicotine is making you make a left turn to go to the gas station by the left turn, they could buy a pack of cigarettes before going to the doctor. But going to buy your tobacco is going to cost you your doctor's appointment. Isaiah Berlin says, in such a case that you make the left turn because you're addicted, you have freedom from, you don't have freedom to. You have negative liberty. No one's stopping you from going. No police, no red lights, no stop signs. Right? But you do not have freedom to. Something is robbing you of your freedom. Your purpose, your destiny, your self-determination is lacking. You yourself know that you're a slave to your addiction. So you're lacking positive freedom.
It seems to me, though, they're just about the same, because in that example, what's stopping you is you do have a constraint. My constraint is I'm addicted to cigarettes, so I have to go in that direction.
Right, but go ahead.
Well, I think that a better way to express this would be to say freedom comes from human or artificial or socially imposed constraints, because in that way we can get around Jeff's conundrum.
It's easier to say, or another way to say it is exterior or internal.
Because the
external or
idea
internal.
Is the roads, you can say, I don't have negative liberty even if the government lets me do it, because they did not, because I happen to live in a place that doesn't have roads.
Oh, so that means that the government is not giving you the opportunity of positive liberty.
Positively.
Nice.
So I think it's a matter of human beings or human protocols, human viewpoints, human conclusions, aside from external, objective, natural, or however you want to say it once. That's the difference, I think.
Right.
That we're happy if no human or government, so to speak, stops us. We do not want to blame, many of us don't want to blame our conundrum on a lack of liberty if it happens to be that nature has stopped us.
Right. But that's a general point. You could also say about education. I'll get to your point. I'll get to you in a second, Julie.
Okay.
Let's say you tell a kid, you know what? I'm giving you freedom. I'm giving you freedom. You have so much freedom, you don't have to go to school. You don't have to wake up. Play video games the whole day. What type of freedom does that kid have? Negative freedom. But you're robbing that kid of positive freedom. Why? Because this kid's going to grow up, and all the opportunities that life should be affording him for happiness, success, everything, relationships, you're robbing him of it.
That's only because he's a kid. If you were an adult, you'd say you're robbing him also by giving him a free ride, doesn't have to go to work.
Yeah.
And it's that person's choice to decide to, quote, rob himself of those.
But you could say, right, that's also right. A person could rob himself to the point that, but what's he missing? Not negative liberty. He's missing positive liberty. Okay. These are the ideas.
Rabbi,
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, are you saying that the negative freedom is an external and the positive freedom is internal?
Not necessarily, but very often that's what ends up happening, but not necessarily at all.
Okay.
Doug, you had a question, or Julie?
Really good.
I did. I was just thinking of a good example being COVID
Okay, go ahead.
with positive liberty.
That what?
We're restricted as to what we can do, where we could go because of a certain situation.
Right. So is that negative situation, that adverse situation that's limiting us? Is that negative liberty? I think so. There's some force which is stopping us, whether we choose to do it. Okay. In any case, and I'll just tell you, it's as we say when you're learning Talmud, when you're learning Gemara, and there's a very difficult piece, and it's very nuanced, and it's very difficult. What you'll say is it's a shvera sugya. Shvera sugya means it's a difficult. Sugya doesn't mean a subject. It means this is a difficult section. It's a difficult segment. So it's very nuanced, and you can read a lot of articles online about this. It's great. Okay, here's my point. But I would just want to share with you the basic idea. Here's my question for you. What do you think is more essential to what we'll call freedom? Right here in America, freedom is such an important value.
Negative liberty.
You say negative is more important. Who says negative liberty is the most important? By raise of hand. Okay. Who says positive liberty is most important? Is the more important element? Anybody? Anybody for positive? Nobody for positive? Okay. Everybody says that the most.
I think both. I think.
No. Which one is more important? It's very easy to say both.
I would say negative.
You'll say negative. You know, there was once a rabbi who had a nature that he was known for always being combative. Anything anybody ever said, he would always start quibbling with it and start. So once somebody went over to him and asked him for his opinion on something. So this guy said, "You tell me what you think, and I'll tell you the opposite." All right, okay. So let's now try to apply negative liberty and positive liberty to Betty's case. Using the concept of negative freedom, negative liberty, should Betty be allowed to go and be a slave, or should she be forced to remain free? If we say that the most important thing is that there's nothing there stopping you, there can't be any coercive force that's inhibiting your anything, your movement, your decisions, your expressions. Based on the value of negative freedom.
Well, the value, the negative freedom was taken away, so she has the choice. The problem is that the choice is going to a institution that is very, very bad.
Oh, but there you have it, as Joel just said. If the court would force Betty to stay in Tennessee, that would be robbing her of negative freedom. The government would be telling her, you cannot go to Tennessee right now. Sorry, forcing her to stay in Massachusetts. right? If the court of Massachusetts was to say, Betty, you're not allowed to go back to Tennessee, that would be robbing her of negative freedom. So negative freedom tells you you cannot stop Betty from going back into slavery. If she chooses to go back into slavery, that's none of our business. We cannot impose upon her a negative coercion. Okay, but based on the doctrine of positive liberty, freedom too, which the main purpose is that the person should have the possibilities to do what they want and what their destiny is. Should we let Betty go back into slavery based on positive liberty?
Yeah.
You say yes. I want to hear why, but does anybody say no? Does anybody say no that based on positive liberty?
What if she wasn't mentally capable?
No.
That's a what if,
Oh,
which is a good question, but it's in the sense it's history, you know. Based on as the judge said, I asked her many times. She sounds sound mind, and she decided yes. So it's a kasha famais, you know. It's a question on a story, you know. So you say no, that even with positive liberty,
I say that positive liberty also argues that she should be
she should be led back. Why?
Because she chose her destiny and her purpose. Her destiny and her purpose is to be enslaved. And
She chose that. Oh,
she chose that.
But the problem is,
there we go.
You
Lawyer
only-
number
you
2.
only-
Here's the rebuttal. Yeah, go ahead.
you only get the choice one time.
That happens a million times, but that happens a million times in our world. People make consequential decisions, contracts, whatever else, that binds them, that screws them, that hurts them, that impinges on them all day long, and those will last for a lifetime in many cases.
So the essential point, Max, go ahead. Yeah.
But if the goal of positive liberty is to permit someone to take control of one's life and realize one's fundamental purpose, once she goes back into slavery, she won't be able to do that.
I disagree.
Okay, so that's fine. You could disagree, which means I think both of you are right. There's no right answer. Positive liberty. There's a way to argue from positive liberty that we should force her to not go into slavery, which is Max's argument. Max is saying, 1 second, if she goes into slavery, on the one hand, she has negative liberty. We let her do whatever she wants. We didn't stop her. On the other hand, she's right now going back into an environment where she has no positive liberty. So if positive liberty, if positive freedom is the main element of freedom, and we're pro-freedom, we cannot let her go back. We need to always keep all the doors and all the possibilities, opportunities open. On the other hand, there's 1 second. Who gets to determine what her purpose and self-determination is? She is saying, I want to be a slave.
Forever.
Who are we to say that, no, we can't let you do that. We're going to let you have more opportunities. But I'm choosing, I want to do this.
Right, because if we were saying to her, you can be a slave, but you can change your mind in 5 years, then she says, my purpose is to be a slave. That is not being a slave if I can change my mind.
But maybe society says, no, we believe it's an inalienable right, that everybody has to be free. We cannot let you be a slave, and therefore we're going to force you. You're not going to have negative liberty.
Change your mind later.
Right.
You
So,
change-
and there's two sides to the coin, which also brings us to the
She
thing.
would not-
Who gets
she would not-
who gets to
she would
decide?
not
1
do-
second.
she would
Dr. Lee,
not
1
do-
second. Who gets to decide? Who
Okay.
gets to determine what your freedom to should be? Right? Is it personal? Is it society? Is it government? Is it public consensus? And if it's up to every single person, you could also have conflicting things, and then also freedom doesn't mean anything. Okay, so the point, I'm not here to come to a conclusive answer. I just want to bring out that the word freedom, as simplistic as we want it to believe, that we want it to be, it's actually quite a complex thing. And there's many different ways to define it. And what we generally have here are two ideas, positive and negative, and it changes the narrative based on how you define freedom, sometimes quite radically. That's what I'm trying to bring out. And it's still, how do you say it? The jury is still out in the case of Betty's case with positive liberty, and I think both of you are right. Both Max, both of our lawyers.
Rabbi,
Okay, Dr. Lee, go ahead.
would you then say that the individual decision to go, she would have been nothing without her family. She would have had a miserable life. So she has the right, even though it's not a good choice, because of freedom, she didn't want to be family. And who's to say that she should be that Judy should be taken away forever from her family?
Right. Yeah, listen, this is all part of the consideration. But again, you could continue quibbling between negative freedom and positive freedom, and based on those definitions, that if we're going to fight for that, or if we're going to be an activist and we're fighting for freedom, based on however you define freedom, maybe there's a strong argument that maybe you should force her out of it. In any case, my point is, I want to bring out that when we say freedom is a Jewish value, the immediate question has to be, what and how does Judaism define freedom? How does Judaism define freedom? Because just saying Judaism believes and values freedom means very little. What, when, how, Words are cheap. Words are not that cheap. Words have a lot of meaning, but how do we define it? There's no question about it. And this is what I want to get to. Freedom is definitely a massive Jewish value. Even just talking contemporarily, all the early abolitionists, drew their inspiration from the Torah. And they've invoked the image of Moses, let my people go. They were very, very biblically inspired. And for us as a people, by the way, my great uncle was Abram Joshua Heschel, who marched, I never told you that, he marched with MLK. Yeah, his sister is my great-grandmother. Okay, a little bit further back. But okay, we got that side covered also. We got it all covered. And, the birth of our people is surrounding liberty and freedom. And we make a big deal out of it, right? One of the most important days and nights and holidays is a Seder night. We celebrate freedom. Freedom is the theme of the night. We make sure to educate our children about it. We remember that God took us out of Egypt and liberated us. It's a mitzvah to remember it every single day. There's something called, just by the way, I'm talking about Jewish law. Jewish law is, there are 6 things you have to remember every single day. Called the 6 remembrances. And it's in the Siddur. I don't know if it's in every Siddur. In my Siddur that I use at the end of the prayer, there's something called 6 remembrances, where it gives you the verse in the Torah, and where it basically says, the Torah says, Zachar, remember. Zachar, remember. One of them is, every single day you have to remember Shabbos. It's a mitzvah in the Torah. Zachar es Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho. Remember Shabbos, the Shabbos day, to make it holy. In other words, you have to remember what Amalek did to you. Okay. So one of the 6 remembrances, you got to remember God took you out of Egypt. You can't forget every single day. So there's no question that if you look at Judaism, we're very, very, freedom is a very big value. But let's be a little bit honest and critical. Can you really say that the Jewish program is a program of liberty?
There are a lot of restrictions.
There's a lot of restrictions. A lot of restrictions. I don't know if people always realize this. Judaism is not a system of recommendations, of nice things, of values. Judaism is a system of law. It really is a system of law. Judaism is telling you what to do. If you don't do it, you're in violation. Which means, we're telling you, we're dictating to you. This is how to do it. It doesn't take long. If you open up the Code of Jewish Law, just read a few pages. You'll see right away. Judaism is it's pretty restrictive. It really is. We're telling you, do this, don't do that. We're going to tell you what to do, and when to do, and if to do, and how to do, and all that good stuff. And there's not a single area of life where Judaism doesn't start bossing you around. That's the honest truth of it. So, how valuable is Judaism's value of freedom when this is the system that it gives us? Okay, let's thicken the plot a little bit, all right? We all know, right? Liberation, freedom, God takes us out of Egypt, and we have the famous biblical quote. It's probably one of the most famous biblical quotes. Let my people go. Let my people go. Simple as that. Who said let my people go? God told Moses to tell it to Pharaoh. And Moses says it countless times in the Torah to Pharaoh. Let my people go. And of course, it became a how do you say it? Not a statement. They became like a marching order. It became one of the became a slogan. That's what I was looking for. It became a slogan for the human rights movement. But is that the whole quote? Let my people go? No.
Plenty more.
No. The sentence doesn't end there. Let me people
so they
go
can serve me in the desert.
so that they can serve me on that mountain. God wasn't taking us out of Egypt just to, you're free, enjoy life, go to Timbuktu, go, do whatever you want. God was saying, taking you out of Egypt, now you're going to work for me. So 1 second. How valuable is the freedom from Egypt if God is right away saying, okay, you don't work for Pharaoh, now you work for me. So, it's very easy to come and say, Judaism believes this, Judaism believes that. Does Judaism really, really believe in freedom? How does it work? Let's read this in text 4. Text 4, page 108. Whew. Debbie, would you like to read?
Divine servitude.
Divine servitude, go for it.
The children of Israel belong to me as servants. They are my servants whom I brought out of Egypt. I am your God.
There you have it. It's clearly in the Torah. God says, you're not really free. You're my servants. I took you out of Egypt, and now you're mine. Read the next text. Text 5. The Talmud discusses it. The Talmud discusses this verse.
The children of Israel belong to me as servants. With this verse, God is saying they are my servants, not servants to other servants.
They're my servants. They're not anybody else's. They're mine. So what does it mean that Judaism believes in freedom? Okay, one last question, one last quote. Take a look at text 3. All right, we're going back, page 108. Text 3. I love this quote because of how perplexing it is. Text 3 from the Ethics of Our Fathers. Ethics of Our Fathers say like this, a shocking statement. No person is free except for those who occupy themselves with Torah. You do not have freedom unless you are occupied with Torah. What does it mean occupied with Torah? Either it means studying Torah, and it means observing the Torah. You don't have freedom unless you are occupied with Torah. Does that make sense? What's Torah? It's
Law.
law. Law by definition is an infringement upon your rights and upon your freedoms. That's the definition of law. Every law doesn't tell you that you're allowed to take vacations, right? Law is telling you what you're not, is restricting you, right? Like laws are, you need to stop at red lights. Is that law restricting your rights, restricting your freedom, restricting your liberty? Absolutely. The amendment for income taxes, that was an amendment. Why? They had to vote on it because income taxes is infringing upon your liberties. You made money, and all of a sudden the government's going to come and take it from you. That's not freedom. Definition of law is we're right now going to chip at your freedoms. We're going to start eating away at your freedoms. In America, that's why in America we don't just pass laws. We try being selective about it. At least I think so, right? The legislative bodies. And the whole idea is this necessary? In America, the model is we want you to be as free as possible. And only what's necessary for a healthy running environment, society, whatever is necessary, will limit you. So you can't drive down a residential street 100 miles per hour. I understand you. So we're taking away a freedom from you, but we need to do it. It's not right. Okay. What does Judaism now say? We have a whole book of laws. We have a whole system of laws for you. And you're not free unless you follow all these laws. That is literally the definition of a contradiction in terms. Freedom and laws don't go together. They're opposites. It's an oxymoron, right? Contradiction in terms. Like saying, this is true fiction. That just doesn't make any sense. Well, either it's true or it's fiction. Either it's freedom or it's laws. Which one is it? Freedom means no laws. Laws mean no freedom. Or less freedom. Okay. What we're getting to is, obviously, Judaism has a different definition for the word freedom. What's Judaism's definition? It's one word. You ready? We so far have negative freedom. We have positive freedom. Judaism believes in essential freedom. Essential freedom. Not negative freedom, not positive freedom. It's a lot deeper. Essential freedom. Or in other words, Judaism asks one question. What do you need as a human, as an animal? What does this entity walking on planet Earth need for its essential being? And whatever is necessary for your essential existence, you need that, or else you are not free. That's what Judaism believes. So let's try to illustrate this. A plant. Anyone here gardeners, or anybody here do the outdoors work? Okay, I don't either. All right, never got into it. Not my thing. You all understand plants are living things. And you could have a healthy plant, and you could have an unhealthy plant. And there's even studies that there's even happiness. There's joy. There's plants which have happiness, and there's a plant which is sad and dreary and not happy, in a bad emotional state, whatever that means for a plant. But I've once read that there's a study that a preschool did that they brought two plants. They gave both plants equal sunlight and equal water every single day. But one plant, they would sing songs to, loving songs, to this one plant every single day, and to the other plant they would ignore. And they literally saw the plant that got all the attention from the kids. It was beautiful and blossomed and was robust. The other one was depressed and mopey, and then all its branches were... What was that?
That must be the problem.
Now we know the problem. We gotta start singing to our plants. All right. What's freedom for a plant? What's freedom for a plant? Or in other words, using the Torah's definition of essential freedom, what does a plant need to be?
What does it need?
What does it need to be?
Nourishment.
What's its nourishment?
Sunlight.
Sunlight, water,
And the nutrients of the soil.
nutrients from the soil.
And carbon dioxide and oxygen.
Right, which that's taken for granted. Thank God. Right, because we all have oxygen and... Okay. Imagine I would see a plant and I'm like, this is horrible. This plant is stuck in one place. Can't go anywhere, can't do anything. I'm going to liberate the plant. I'm going to rip it out from its roots and send it free. What did I just do?
Kill it.
I killed it. So by trying to liberate this plant, what did I actually do? I actually robbed it of its freedom, of its essential freedom, of its freedom to be. Now it's not, its existence is gone. Its essential being is now compromised. It's not free anymore. Okay, an animal. What does an animal need to be? What's essential to its being, to its existence? Let's say we gave an animal exactly what we give to a plant. Got to stay in one place, and you have water and sunlight. Is that freedom for an animal? Obviously not. Why not? Because those things work for a plant. That's the essential freedom for a plant. An animal needs to be able to move, needs to be able to have a social life, needs to also have food, or whatever else, needs to be able to play and exercise. So its freedom changes. Why does it change? Because of what its essential needs are, and therefore it needs to be met. What about a human? If we'll give a human exactly what an animal gets, but nothing more. Freedom to move around, sun, food, drink, but that's it. No other opportunities. No other nourishment. Will that make the cut for a human being? Why not?
Intellectually, you have to grow intellectually.
Intellectually, every single human being, the intellect is an integral part of who we are. It's part of our essential existence, essential needs. And if our minds are not being developed, we become very miserable. If our emotional needs aren't met, we become miserable. So the freedom for an animal ends up actually hurting us. A human being needs to be intellectually challenged, needs to be educated. It's essentially it's necessary. So that's how Judaism always looks. What do you need for your literal health, for your objective, essential health, for your essential being? What do you need? And whatever that is, you need to have that or else you're not free. That is Judaism's perspective. And there's also a lot of trust to that type of definition, because at the end of the day, a doctor can tell you what your physical needs are. A doctor cannot tell you what your spiritual needs are. But the same way, somebody could be physically malnourished. And if somebody's physically malnourished, their freedom is right now, their essential freedom is terribly compromised because they're not able to function. Same thing spiritually. And this gives us a very deep understanding of how Judaism sees freedom. And we can now answer our question. Let's read text 6. Text 6 is from the Rebbe. Page 110. Pam, would you like to read?
Sure.
All right.
Service of God is not something that stifles the identity of a Jew, God forbid. On the contrary, divine service is the very core of every Jew's being. This is the meaning of the sages, teaching that no person is free except for those who occupy themselves with Torah. Even though Torah observance is termed service, observing Torah and mitzvot is the true nature of a Jew. As the Mishnah teaches, I was created to serve my Creator. Only when serving God is a Jew truly free.
There you have it. Freedom for a Jew is that they are serving God. If a Jew is not doing mitzvahs, Judaism has a scary message. I want you to know that your freedom is totally hijacked. Hijacked by what? We'll get to that. But you're not free. You know why you're not free? Because you are not being yourself. You are not essentially free. Your essential identity is not being expressed, is not being given the opportunity to be. You are not free to be. You could choose to be free to be, but currently you're not. So there's negative freedom, which is freedom from. There's positive freedom, which is freedom to. And then there's essential freedom, which let's call that freedom of being, or freedom to be. Freedom to be. When you are yourself, when your body and your soul and all their needs and all their essential identities are met, that's freedom. That is Judaism's value. And therefore, why is Judaism against slavery? Why is Judaism so pro-freedom? Anything that compromises your relationship with God, your service of God, which is your ultimate identity, which is the necessary, essential existence of your soul. If something compromises that, that's absolutely a big problem. Your freedom is right now being compromised. And it's not just a simple freedom of, okay, there's another human being who's ruling over you. This is the Jewish value of freedom. Every Jew has to be in a relationship with God. There can't be any other type of relationship which limits that. And that's why we're against slavery. You know why? Let's go back to the Talmud. I think this is the clincher. Text 5 is the value. I want to reread text 5 with you. This is the value of Jewish law. Text 5 from the Talmud, Baba Metzia, the children of Israel belong to me as servants. They are my servants, not servants to other servants. Freedom for a Jew is we serve God. If we're servants to anybody or anything else, we're not free. How does that sound? This concludes the Jewish value. We're 10 minutes over time. We're doing okay. Don't worry. How does that sound? Are we good? Any questions? Because I want to segue now into law. You ready to change gears? Let us talk about law. And I want to apply the value of freedom, essential freedom, Judaism's value of freedom, the freedom of a Jew to serve God, and that a Jew should not be in any other service that compromises serving God. Let's see how that's invoked in Jewish law. Let's begin with a case study on page 112. And this is an actual, this is not just a hypothetical case. This is an actual case from a old halachic book where this question was posed to a great rabbi. His name was Rabbi Asher ben Yechiel, the Rosh. Okay. Rabbi Asher ben Yechiel, one of the very famous early halachic authorities. This is the case study. Jeff, would you like to read? Case study A, page 112. Pay attention to the details.
Reuven borrowed money from Shimon and failed to repay the loan. Reuven is now living with a relative where he eats good food and dons expensive clothing. His wife is similarly expensively attired and even provides gifts to her friends. Reuven claims that all of this is provided by his relative, whereas he personally is penniless. He sits idle and refuses to engage in any labor or business of the type he always performed in the past, because he knows that any money he earns will necessarily go toward repaying his loan.
Continue.
You be the judge. What would be your decision if such a case came before you?
There you have it. There you have it. Shimon is absolutely taking advantage. He's saying I'm penniless. You could look at all my tax returns. You could look at my tax filings. I've got no money. But meanwhile, he's living this high life. He has connections. He has relatives, and whatever he's doing, he's getting out of repaying his hefty loan. What do you think we should do to Shimon? Sorry, Reuven. What should we do to Reuven? What do you say?
I would say that there's not much we can do except encourage his family not to support him anymore.
Really? There's nothing else we could do?
Well, I wouldn't put him in jail
Why not?
because I'm Jewish. No, because I don't think our religion would want us.
What do you say? What would you do? This guy's a total scoundrel. He's a scammer, a fraudster. He borrows money and then finds this loophole to continue living this privileged lifestyle. He's going on vacations. Privileged lifestyle, but he's not paying a penny.
You can go back to work.
Make him go back to work. How do you make him go back to work?
Good question.
But that's the thing, just make him go back to work. I don't know. Force him to work. He had a job. He used to have a job. Force him to go back to his job and start making money. Pay back his debt. If you don't want to work when you don't owe anybody money, go ahead. But not when you owe somebody money. David, go ahead.
Take away the stuff that you gave him. You only loaned it.
No, but all that money is gone. Let's say you loaned him $500,000. He spent it. It's gone.
Well, first of all, you put a lock on, lock the key. Keep the money. Don't advance money anymore.
No, but it's done. He already spent it, and now he doesn't have any money. He says, all I got is $100 in my bank account. I have $100. Everything else has been supported by his relatives. He doesn't own his house, doesn't own anything. Everything's my relatives. But meanwhile, he's driving beautiful cars. He has a Tesla. He doesn't have to pay for gas. It's all my relatives, not mine. Okay. In the ancient world, there were two go-to ways to deal with such a case. And these were ubiquitous. This was common up until 150 years ago, maybe a little bit more. One thing was called debt bondage. Debt bondage means the court forces you to work until you pay your debt. Or you have to work you are forced to pay for your lender. You're forced to work for your lender until your work equaled the value that you borrowed, what you owe. That was one thing, something called debt bondage. Another tool that was used in the ancient world, and not so ancient world, was something called debtor's prison. Debtor's prison simply means you owe money, go to jail. Going to jail is not going to make you make more money. Doesn't make a difference. You're not paying somebody else your loan, go to jail. And you would sit in jail until either a relative or a friend or somehow you came up with the money and paid it. When your debt is paid, you come out of jail. Until then, you're a criminal, you go to jail. Do you like any of those two ideas? Debt bondage or debt prison? Or debtor's prison? Pro, against?
Well, doesn't the debt bondage happen even now in terms of garnishing wages until somebody pays back?
You can always quit your job.
Always declare bankruptcy. Right? In today's day and age, you could declare bankruptcy, and you can become a millionaire afterwards, and you don't owe anybody a penny. I declared bankruptcy. Judaism doesn't have any system of bankruptcy. Okay. So when it comes to a loan, this is what the Torah would say. First of all, returning a debt, if you owe somebody money, returning a loan, is a obligation, is a biblical commandment, and you have a mitzvah to return a loan. If you don't pay back a loan, according to Jewish law, the court is allowed to go, seize your property, besides minus whatever you essentially need. So I don't know exactly how Jewish law would determine what's essential to living, but whatever is essential to living, like having a roof over your home, that's essential. Judaism will not take away your home.
But it's not relevant to this. He has nothing.
Right. I'm just saying, this is how Judaism works. That minus whatever is necessary, Judaism would come in and seize it all to pay back your loan. But let's say you have nothing, which is what this case is. This guy has no assets under his name. Jewish law ultimately says the court cannot do anything. Reuven, this guy, he will always live with a biblical commandment to return the money. And until he does that, he's in violation of biblical commandment. But the court cannot enforce him if he doesn't have any assets. We cannot enforce anybody to work against their free will. That's Jewish law. Let's read text 8. We're back to you, Stuart. Page 115.
I'm sorry, one question.
Sure.
Why can they not force him to work? Because that would allow him, we have said before, we're supposed to be servants of God and we're supposed to do God's will. If God.
So let's get to the reason soon. We'll get there.
Okay.
Let's first read this in Jewish law and we'll develop it from there.
Debt recovery. Scripture establishes that when creditors demand payment of debts and the debtor's own assets, the debtor's existential needs must first be provided for, following which the remainder of the debtor's assets are granted to the creditors. If the debtors own no assets, or if their assets are only sufficient to provide for their existential needs, then nothing can be done to the debtors, and they may not be imprisoned.
Can't do anything. Nothing can be done. You can't put them to prison. You can't do anything. That's Jewish law. Now, this question that we just learned, the case study, Reuven and Shimon, Reuven borrows money, then goes into this interesting lifestyle where he's living off of his relatives' money. This question was posed, this was a real case, to Rabbi Usher, Rabbeinu Usher ben Yechiel, known as the Rush. He lived in the 13th, 14th century. And this question was posed to him. What do we do over here? He has wealthy relatives providing for him, and he's doing nothing. He's not working. He used to have a job. Now he's not doing anything. He's a capable guy. And what the question that was posed to Rabbi Usher, the Rush, was the creditor asked, the lender asked Rabbi Usher, can we put him into debtor's bondage? Can we force him to work? Let's force him to work. That's what they asked Rabbi Usher. Which sounds like it's not the biggest deal. This guy used to work. This guy could work. Right? He doesn't have any handicap. Go work. Go pay back your loan. Comes Rabbi Usher, and this is what he answers. Debbie, go ahead. Text 9, page 116.
Beyond jurisdiction, Shimon's request that Reuben work in order to repay his debt is not something that the court can compel. The court cannot extend its jurisdiction over Reuben's actual person by compelling him to perform work in order to repay his debt.
There you have it. In Judaism, forcing somebody to work is akin to slavery. And that's a no-no. Doesn't matter what the conditions are. If he doesn't want to work and we're compelling him to work, that is something which is already crossing that
But
line.
we're enabling him to do what the Torah says to do, which is to.
That has to be his choice. That's his choice. We can never force somebody to work.
rabbi, so.
That would be enslaving him. Go ahead, doctor.
Rabbi forced,
Yes.
then talking to his family to stop deporting him is a means of forcing, so that would be against them.
We could do other things. We could go and call the court calling his family for a meeting and saying, do you know that you are enabling this guy to be in violation of his duty to pay back the debt? 100%. We could also use other methods of coercion. And this was something which was used in ancient Israel when Jewish law was the law of the land. For example, we could say you're not allowed to walk into the synagogue. You're not allowed to come into the synagogue until you pay back your debt. That's fine. You're allowed to tell them you're not allowed to walk into the public bathhouse. You're not allowed to enter the public bathhouse. You're allowed to use those social coercion. That's fine. But you cannot enslave. That's the Jewish value. You cannot enslave another human being, period. Now again, that doesn't mean that this Reuven scoundrel has the right to go. He's not off the hook. He has an obligation to the Torah. And if he doesn't pay, Scripture calls him wicked. It's the definition of wicked. Loi v'rasha v'lo yishalim. It's a verse in Psalms. A debtor doesn't pay, he's wicked. But we cannot force. Again, this is the Jewish value. A Jew is a servant of God and not a slave to another human being. That's the value. I want you to realize simply the idea that this was very, very radical. Up until very recent, the 13th Amendment. When was the 13th Amendment ratified?
1860s.
1860s.
1866 or 1865.
Yeah, it's right around then.
Yeah.
It's very recent history, 150 years ago. Only, in America, only 150 years ago, was this idea that a person cannot be put into involuntary servitude. It was only outlawed in America 150 years ago. Until then, every single society, including Western democracies, Western societies, all had what was called if you owed money, we'll force you to work. But in Judaism, the value of freedom, right? You have to realize, for 3,000 years ago, this is very progressive of Judaism, very radical. You cannot enslave and, force somebody to work.
Although our forefathers had slaves.
Nah,
Right,
one
that's
second.
the Jewish value.
1 second. What slaves?
Eliezer.
Eliezer is called Eved Avram, a servant of Abraham. Was he a slave? I don't know if he was a slave. He was a servant. I don't know what the terms of their relationship was.
And even Hagar, a maidservant. So
It's a good question. You also have to understand what was the nature of that relationship. I don't know. There's a much bigger elephant in this room. Shall we address the elephant in the room?
Sure.
I'm going to address it, but I'm not going to respond now. At 9 o'clock, I don't mind responding. The Torah does have laws of slavery. And it does seem that the Torah does endorse, tolerate some form of slavery.
Regulate even.
It regulates slavery, right? So, well, we have this Jewish value, and then Judaism aren't come and say you can have a Jewish slave, you can have a Gentile slave. So this is going to be my quick answer to that, which is not really answering it. But that is not at all Judaism endorsing slavery. And it's not either Judaism condoning slavery. This value stands notwithstanding. Judaism is anti-slavery. Then how could we explain that Judaism regulates slavery? Judaism doesn't just say slavery, it's evil. Don't touch it with a 10-foot stick. 10-foot pole. 10-foot pole. That's right. I'm tired. I'm not as sharp. Okay, right, we all are. And it's hot. Okay. Judaism regulates it. So I'm going to respond to that. And a bunch of you were there. At the beginning of COVID, we did a course titled The Jewish Course of Why. And we had a full class dedicated to this, if you remember. If Judaism is pro-freedom, how could Judaism tolerate, regulate, have freedom within its program, have slavery within its program? So we went through it in depth there, and I can respond soon as well. But slavery in the Torah, whatever form it takes, does not affect this value. The fact is, this is the value. The value is freedom. We don't like slavery. It's antithetical to Jewish values. How do we reconcile that with slavery? Stay on at 9 o'clock. All right? Okay. So the 13th Amendment was when the United States Constitution added an amendment, 13th Amendment, that finally abolished any form of slavery or involuntary servitude. But there's one exception to that rule in the amendment. You ever drive on the highways and you see a van of prisoners and they're cleaning the... is that voluntary work or involuntary?
Involuntary.
They're being forced to. So what happened to the 13th Amendment? I thought you're not allowed to force anybody to work. 13th Amendment has a very notable exception right there at the beginning. Let's read text 10. Where are we holding? Pam? Jeff? Who's up? Pam? Go for it. Text 10.
Once cleared by the prison doctor, inmates can be forced to work under threat of punishment as severe as solitary confinement. Legally, this labor may be totally uncompensated. More typically, inmates are paid meagerly, as little as 2 cents per hour for their full-time work in the fields, manufacturing, warehouses, or kitchens. How is this legal? Didn't the 13th Amendment abolish all forms of slavery and involuntary servitude in this country? Not quite. In the shining promise of freedom that was the 13th Amendment, a sharp exception was carved out. Section 1 of the amendment provides, quote, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude,
Go for it, no worries.
except as punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction.
You could close the thing first. Yeah, there you go. Go for it. Yeah, go ahead.
Simply put, incarcerated persons have no constitutional rights in this arena. They can be forced to work as punishment for their crimes.
See, even today, right, in very well-developed democracy of the West, of the United States, and we're anti-slavery and we have abolished slavery, but we still have today in our country some form of slavery, involuntary servitude, which is prison labor. Prisoners are not protected by the 13th Amendment. It's unbelievable. And Judaism does not have that. There's no exclusionary clause in Judaism to this value. You cannot force somebody to work.
In Israel, in the prisons, do they force people to work?
So my first answer is I don't know. And the most important point is that Israeli law is not Jewish law. Israeli law is really based upon English common law. And then certain justices have introduced Torah-inspired elements within law. But the basis of Israelis, of modern day, the state of Israel's law, is not Jewish law. It's English common law. So, but to your point, I don't know. I don't know what's happening in Israel. Okay, the next form of how you deal with a debtor, with somebody who's defaulting on their debt, in the ancient world, and again, not so ancient. It happened here in America not so long ago. It happened in Canada, in England. And I just saw it's in the back of it's in the additions to your lesson. In Greece, it was only abolished in 2008.
Really?
Debtor's prison. Can't pay your debt, you go to jail. That's how we deal with it. And this was very, very common. Very, very common. You sit in jail, you rot in jail. So if you're lucky, you have family relatives have pity on you. They put together the money. Worst comes to worst, your young child has to go sell newspapers on the street corners to make to Charles Dickens, you know. Charles Dickens, his father was sentenced to debtor's prison. And as a young boy, I don't know, maybe 6, 7, 8 years old, he had to go work in a factory. He put stickers on bottles. Just to save his father. Can you imagine a little boy having to do that? Text 11. Let's read this. So this describes... Sorry, not text 11. We just did text 11. Let us... No. Yeah, you're right. Text 11. Text 11, page 118. Jeff, go for it.
The debtors were sent to jail until they were able to pay off their debts. These were called debtors' prisons, a peculiar form of punishment. Indefinite incarceration was the mode of punishment. Sometimes the convicts stayed with their families in the prison. Family members were free to come and go according to their wish. Therefore, even children were born and raised there. The prisons were full of rats, lice, and fleas. The prisoners were denied basic necessities of life, such as food, water, and clothing. It is said that these places were so dirty and filthy that around 25% of the inmates died due to these horrible living conditions. The debtors were imprisoned and tortured at the pleasure of the creditors. When other countries of Europe had legislation limiting the debt imprisonment term to 1 year, England did not have such a law. When in 1842 the Fleet prison was closed, it was found that debtors were there for more than 30 years.
Yeah, horrible. So this was the ubiquitous part of how societies ran, ran criminal law.
Criminal law. These are non-criminal.
This is not even criminal. Just somebody is
Civil
defaulting
law.
on it. The civil law. Somebody is defaulting. Just send them into jail indefinitely until certain countries eventually made it the maximum 1 year.
Right.
1 year, you said, right? That's what we saw here. What does Judaism say on this? So you probably know by now. Come on, if we're not going to force somebody to even work, we're not throwing them into jail. But I want to read you a text. It's a very powerful text. It's very powerful because of the circumstances. And again, this is a practical case that was brought to a rabbi. Again, a very influential rabbi in the world of developing Jewish law. His name was Rabbi Yitzchak ben Sheshes. He's known as the Rivash. The Rivash. 14th century sage. Lived a little bit after the Rush, who we've just quoted from. Am I confusing you with the names? Okay. No. By the way, next year, winter, we have a course, a tour of the Jewish library. Unbelievable course. Because we're always quoting this book, that book, what, when, how, when. A tour of the Jewish, unbelievable course. And I've also had the honor of working on that course. We've already completed that process. So next winter's course. Okay, we got lots of good courses on the. Okay. This takes us to 14th century Aragon. Aragon, I believe the kingdom of Aragon. Today it's part of Spain. Then it was an independent kingdom. And there were two Jews who lived in Aragon. Reuven and Shimon. By the way, Reuven and Shimon are always the boilerplate names that are inserted. It's like that we protect the privacy. Like what would you do in America? Tom, Dick, and Harry? I don't know. Just you keep it simple. Basic 10 tribes. Reuven, Shimon, Levi. They always go in order of those characters. Reuven is borrowing from Shimon. The law of the land in Aragon is that if you default on your debt, you go to prison. That's the law of the land. Shimon, right? Reuven and Shimon are both Jews. Shimon asks Reuven for collateral. I'm going to lend you $10,000. Give me collateral. Reuven says, I don't have collateral. But let's add explicitly into the contract that I am giving up my freedom as collateral. Which means, Reuven says, and they put it into their contract, that if I default on the debt, you could turn me over to the authorities and put me into debtor's prison. Okay, Shimon says, okay. Shimon agrees. Shimon lends the money. Reuven, what happens? Reuven defaults. Or else we wouldn't be talking about it, right? There's no story. So Reuven defaults. Shimon goes over to Reuven and shows him the contract and says, look, you put your freedom on the line. Reuven says, I know that I wrote that, but Judaism doesn't let it. So Reuven starts playing that game back. Judaism doesn't let me to go to jail. Shimon says, but you yourself put it into the contract. So they went to Rabbi Yitzchak ben Sheshes, the Rivash, and asked them to resolve their argument. This is a very powerful text. Rabbi Yitzchak ben Sheshes comes. This is his response, his responsa. Stuart, go ahead. Text 12, page 119.
Inquiry. Reuven borrowed money from Shimon. In the contract, Reuven put up his personal freedom as collateral. For so is the law in Aragon. If a debtor does not own available assets from which his debt can be repaid, he is incarcerated. Shimon, the creditor, now demands the repayment of his loan, but Reuven has no assets from which to pay. Shimon requests that Reuven be imprisoned as he explicitly agreed to in advance. Reuven argues that he cannot be imprisoned for his debt because there is no precedent in Jewish law for a person to be imprisoned due to a debt. You requested my opinion on the law in such a case. Response. Jewish law sides with Reuven the debtor. A person cannot consent to be incarcerated. The Torah states, the children of Israel belong to me as servants, from which we derive that we cannot be made servants to other servants. No contract clause can allow for a person to be compelled to work, not even in his regular vocation. It goes without saying that no clause can allow for a person to be incarcerated and made to languish in a dark dungeon.
There you have it. Rivash totally rejects it. It's in the contract. He says it's illegitimate. No one has the right to do it. In Jewish law, he clearly invokes this value. The children of Israel belong to me as servants. You cannot be servants to other servants. You cannot be slaves to other slaves. Period. And therefore, going back, the Rivash, Rabbi Yitzchak ben Sheshes, tells Reuven and Shimon that Reuven has an obligation to pay, but you cannot enslave him. There's no putting him into jail. And there we have it. And this is, again, this used to be a uniquely Jewish standard. Jews used to be crazy. You don't put your debtors in jail? What are you, nuts? Today, we're seeing that it's, no, this has been accepted as the norm. But it's an unbelievable fact that Judaism had these values thousands of years ago. This wasn't even... Okay, we have 10 minutes left, dear friends. I may go 5 minutes over, okay? I want to give you one more example in Jewish law, and this is an even more extreme example. We're first going to learn the law, and you're going to get upset when you hear about the law. I like getting you upset. 8:50 at night is a good time to get upset, no? Okay. So let's first go through the law and make sure we understand the law. And then once we understand the law, then we will try to understand the rationale behind the law. And you're going to see Judaism applying this value of freedom in a very extreme case, where I don't think we would intuitively think. Turn back to page 114, please. We're going to read our second case study. Case study B, page 114, and this again is based on a true, actual case that was heard at the New Hampshire Superior Court in the year 1834, and I believe that this is the precedence. This is the source of, till today, how American law will what? What's the word I'm looking for?
Will abide or fodder or follow.
Will follow. Well, this is how we deal. This is how we apply law. Here's the case study. David, would you like to read?
Mr. Britton signed a contract to work for Mr. Turner.
Okay, 1 second. Let me just clarify. We are on page 114, case study B. We're good? Okay, sorry. Go for it.
Mr. Britton signed a contract to work for Mr. Turner for 1 year, for which he would be paid $120 in total, equaling $10 per month. But Britton ceased working after 9 months, and Turner was able to find a replacement worker only for the remaining 3 months for $45, equaling $15 per month. Turner did not pay Britton anything for his uncompleted contract, and Britton sued to collect pay for the work he performed.
Okay, that's the case. You understand the case? Britton has a contract to work for 12 months, $10 per month. 9 months in, he breaches contract and says, I'm out, I'm quitting. And now, to hire an employee to do the job that Mr. Britton did is going to cost an extra $5 per month. So now there's a $15 loss to his employer. Okay, how much do you think Mr. Britton should receive as payment for his work? There's 3 options. I want to hear what you say. Option 1 is 0. Britton is in breach of contract. He has forfeited his right to any payment. Who goes with that? With option A, with option 1. You breach contract, you're over. You don't get any money. What do you say? Anybody for that?
No.
That's a bit extreme, right? You don't pay the guy anything? Okay. All right, option 2, $90. Britton works for 9 to 12 months. He should be paid pro rata for 9 months.
Right,
Who goes for that? For the 9, which is simple,
right.
You guys say that? You say that? We're getting a few hands up. Okay, option C, option 3, $75. Less than pro rata, less than the $10 he should be making per month. Why? Let's read. $75. Britton would have been entitled to pro rata pay of $90, but his breach of contract forced Turner, his employer, to hire a replacement at a greater cost. Turner's loss from the affair totals $15. So this should be deducted from Britton's pay. Britain, who's breaching the contract, should take the blow, should suffer the loss of the $15 that his employer now is going to incur. That's option C. Who's for option C? The lawyers. There we go. And Stuart. And Debbie, the lawyer's wife. Who's for option C? Anybody else?
I am.
That's option C. Okay, 3 options. I'll tell you right now. If you want to know what was ruled in Britain v. Turner in 1834 in the New Hampshire Superior Court, it was option C. Britain is in breach of contract. He gets paid for what he did, but if there's any loss that's being incurred to the employer, he has to lose. He has to take that blow. What does Jewish law say? Here's what Jewish law says. So this brings us to a new area of law, which is employees' rights, employees' freedom, workers' freedom. Jewish law says like this. Let's read a piece of Talmud, and then we're going to see how this law is developed in the Code of Jewish Law. Talmud, Pam, text 13, page 121. We're skipping around a little bit, which is how you learn Talmud. Talmud is not just a linear reading. There's a lot of going back and forth. Okay, text 13.
The right to quit. A worker has the right to withdraw from their employment even in the middle of the working day. This right emerges from the verse, "The children of Israel belong to me as servants," whereby God is stating, they are my servants, not servants to other servants.
Here, once again, the Talmud is invoking the value of freedom. And Jewish law says because this freedom, it teaches us that a worker has the right to quit anytime. What does this mean? Practically, what are the laws behind this? Now, I just want to, before we go and read the laws, I want to just clarify. Judaism is not saying that a employee should breach his contract. And we're not saying, no, you shouldn't. You're in contract. You should honor it. And what Jewish law says, it's interesting that Jewish law literally says these words, that if the employee breaches contract, his employer has the right to be upset at him. Which is interesting. Jewish law gives you the right to be upset. Yesh lo love taremas. That's what it says. You have the right to be upset. He's in breach of contract. But at the end of the day, Jewish law says he has the right to. We cannot penalize him, and he has the right to do that. His freedom. And we do not penalize somebody for breaching contract. Practically, how does Jewish law establish the law? Let's read text 14. And incidentally, we are right now reading, if you look at text 14, from Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, the son of Rabbi Asher ben Yechiel, who we studied from earlier. So Rabbi Asher ben Yechiel was a tremendous halachist, if that's the word. His son, Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, is the author of Arba Turim, which is the original version of the Code of Jewish Law. He is the first one who properly wrote down. He wasn't the first one. Maimonides did it before him. But the current Code of Jewish Law is based upon the work of Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher. So we're learning from father, from son. Okay, this is wonderful. Text 14, go ahead, Jeff.
An employee has the right to quit their job even in the middle of the day, and they are given the upper hand when calculating the pay they're entitled to receive. The quitting employee is entitled to payment for the value of work accomplished before quitting. This remains true even if the market rate for such work has since risen, leaving the employer unable to hire another worker to complete the job with the remainder of the funds. For example, an employee was hired for 8 dinars per day, but quit halfway through the first day. Even if the cost of this particular form of labor has now risen to 12 dinars per day, so that a replacement worker for the second half of the day will charge 6 dinars, the quitting employee must still be paid 4 dinars for the half day of work. We do not protect the employer from having to pay more than the 8 dinars they originally intended to pay by deducting the expense of the replacement worker from the quitting worker's pay, which would leave the latter with only 2 dinars.
Okay, so what do we say over here? Jewish law rules that the employee who is breaching their contract, quitting, is given the upper hand. What does that mean? What does that mean he has the upper hand versus having the lower hand? You see, this would be the difference. Let's define these terms. Employee gets the upper hand or employee gets the lower hand. Employee gets the upper hand means that we assess the situation. We look very simply. You worked for 9 months, right? Going back to, what was the name over here? Remember the names again anymore? Britton and Turner? Okay. Britton, his contract is that he gets paid $10 a month. He left 9 months in. Upper hand means we look at what he did. He gets paid the equivalent of his work, which is called pro rata, and he gets $90. Employee getting the lower hand means we also consider the losses. Is the employer going to lose money now because of this breach of contract? Somebody has to take the loss. Employee getting the lower hand means the employee gets the lower hand and has to suffer the losses. Jewish law says no, the employee has the upper hand. If there's losses, let the employer deal with that. Do you like this law?
It's the law in the United States for regular employees, not for independent contractors.
So we're not talking about independent contractors, we're talking about employees, right? If you work for somebody.
Independent contractor is even a service provider too. Even a service provider who's independent contractor
Right.
you could also get around that.
Right, but let's talk just about employee and employer,
It's
which
our
means a
law.
contract.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's our law.
It's our law that he gets the lower hand.
It's the upper hand. The employee gets the
Really?
upper hand. You can't stiff an employee or cut and penalize an employee for quitting.
Really? You don't penalize?
You can't take under this wage and hour laws of the federal government. They have a right to their wage and hour.
Uh-huh. But if there's some form of loss, okay, I was under the impression that he
Not
gets
for
the lower
employment,
hand.
but for other things, if they're supplying goods, for instance, or if they're independent contractors supplying services.
It's not independent contract, I'm talking about employee
Yeah,
specifically.
no, it's
So-
wage and hour laws.
With an employee, you can't deduct it from their wages. You can
But-
sue them later for the damages, but you can't deduct it from the wages.
And if you sue, will you be successful in court?
You could, I mean, obviously.
Uh-huh. Okay. So you know what?
But-
Then we're not sure on what American law is over here. According to our two lawyers in-house, he still has the upper hand.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more skeptical than Max on that.
Okay. Now, in Jewish law, there's one caveat to this rule. So, the employee has the upper hand, which means the employee quitting, he's breaching contract. And there's going to be a loss now, because now, 9 months later, to hire this type of worker costs now $5 more. Employee doesn't have to suffer the loss. He has the upper hand. There's one caveat. Let's read this one caveat. The one caveat is if there is irreversible loss, there's a real serious damage, an irretrievable loss that the employer is going to suffer because this guy is just taken off in the middle of the job. Let's read how Jewish law continues to discuss this. And all right, text 15, page 123. Where are we holding? You, Jeff?
I just read it.
You just read, so back to you. Go for it, Stuart. Text 15.
Irreversible loss. If the work was time sensitive and its neglect will cause irreversible damage, the quitting employee has the lower hand in the calculation of wages. For example, workers hired to remove flax from the water it was soaking in. If the flax is not punctually removed from the water, it will decay. If there are extenuating circumstances, such as illness or death of a family member, the employee has the right to quit while retaining the upper hand in the calculation of wages. Absent such circumstances, the employee is given the lower hand when calculating their pay because quitting prematurely may cause the employer an irreversible loss.
Oh, so if there's a case where there's an irretrievable loss, an irreversible loss, no, that you'll get sued for. And Jewish law says the employee has a responsibility to not quit at a time that's going to cause a tremendous loss, an unrecoverable loss to his boss, to the employer. What's an example? I'll give you a little example. So we have an example here of flax and water. Imagine your job. Imagine I have a roofing company. That's my job. I go to houses and we replace roofs. Imagine I have workers, and that's their skill, and they remove the roof from somebody's house. All the shingles are gone. And all of a sudden they say, you know what, we're quitting.
Then it rains.
And then it rains. What happens? They sue me. The homeowner now sues me that their whole house is destroyed. In such a case, the employees who took off mid-contract at a time that I'm going to have such a irreversible loss, no, then it's on them. Then I can sue them for that. So if you're going to quit mid-contract, Judaism says you have to make sure to do it at a time that you're not going to cause your boss a recoverable loss. But if it's just the loss of the updated wage, a higher wage of hiring a new employer, then you still have the upper hand. Okay, that's the law. Now, here's my question for you: why? Why does Judaism rule this way? And even more than that, we saw the Talmud say, the Talmud invoked from the verse, the children of Israel belong to me as servants. They are my servants, not servants of other servants. What does this have to do?
Otherwise, as an employee, it would take away my freedom to quit when I want, because I know that I'm gonna.
They're gonna have to pay more. You're gonna lose.
Right.
So this is what Judaism says, which is an interesting concept. Why do people? I actually wish I looked up the statistics before class. Anybody know what percentage of America are employed, and what percentage are self-contractors, are independent contractors? Most people are employed, right?
I don't know.
Safe to assume?
I don't know.
We don't
I'm
know.
guessing.
We don't know. Let's guess most people are employed.
Did it change with COVID, you know?
Did COVID change? I don't know. I think most people are employed. I think so. Or it doesn't make a difference. Why do people choose employment over self-employed? You can work for yourself. It's a machaya. You can work whenever you want.
A steady paycheck is the main thing.
There you go for it. People trade in their freedom, their schedules. When you work for somebody, you can't just take up on vacation whenever you want. You only have lunch. You only have lunch for this amount of time. You gotta show up at this time. You can't leave until this time. If you're self-employed, how much freedom you have? You could start work at 11 o'clock. You could do work at 2 in the morning. You can do whatever you want. You can work 25 hours a day. You can pay yourself above minimum wage, below minimum wage. You can do whatever you want. You trade all those liberties and freedoms and flexibilities in for, and what you get in return is the security of a set paycheck. Somebody else now has to worry about how they're going to get the money to pay you, but that's what you get. So Judaism sees here something which is starting to erode at the value of freedom. Here's a case, which is legal, of course. Employment is legal, but somebody is trading in their freedoms to somebody else, and somebody else now going to limit their freedoms. And Judaism says, okay, you could do that. You could be employed. But we have to protect the situation. This is being a little bit too similar to slavery. So Judaism says, always going to give the employee the upper hand. It's like that. We never get stuck in the slippery slope of an employer, in even the most minutest way, abusing their employee. Dear friends, I want to conclude right now. We're done the law. A final thought. Final thought. And I want all of us to leave today's class with the value of freedom. We've learned about how the point is we see how serious Judaism takes it. We have to be free. We have to be free to serve God because that's who we are. Let's read this last text, which is not a legal text. It's an inspirational text. Text 17, page 126. From Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, the great poet of the Jewish people. Text 17, page 126. Servants of time are servants of servants. A servant of God alone is free. Therefore, when each person seeks their portion, my portion is God, says my soul for me. What does this piece of poetry mean? Servants of time are servants of servants. What does that mean, servants of time?
Person who would constrain you to deadlines would be a human being, and you.
Servants of time, first of all. You know how many people say, Rabbi Duva, I would love to take this course. I just don't have time. I can't study Torah. I don't have time. I'm busy. I'm going on vacation. What? You going on vacation? I thought you meant to have more time to go on vacation. I'm not criticizing anybody. But this and that, I can't.
We're breaking up.
We're breaking up?
Breaking up.
You hear me now? All right, hopefully it works. But there's something even deeper over here. Something even deeper. Servants of time means that you're letting the time that you live in. The word is the zeitgeist. what's in vogue, the fads of the time, determine your life. You're letting powers outside, influences outside of yourself, to determine what life you're going to lead, what you're going to do, what you're going to be interested in, what your opinions are going to be. And that really means that even in today's world, where we do have negative liberty, negative freedom, but according to Judaism, Judaism says we're actually slaves. What are we slaves to? We're slaves to society. We're slaves to society's norms. We conform to whatever society says is normal and whatever's not normal. And that's called, according to Judaism, slaves. We have to be free. What does it mean to be free? To live a life true to your soul, which is a very ambitious thing to do. Stop letting the world determine what life should look like, and make an honest question. What do I want? Forget about everything else. Let's say the whole world is gone. There's just me. I don't have time to say the joke, but the punchline is, when I'm drunk, the entire Moscow is dead. That's okay. There's once a Russian drunk, and he says, when I'm drunk, the whole Moscow is dead. So just imagine the world is gone. Who am I? What do I want? What do I live for? What do I care for? What is my essential being? And you have to answer that calling. And if not, you're not free. My portion is God, says my soul from me. Unless we have the courage to hold on to that and say, I'm going to live my life that way, then we're not free. We are servants to time. We're slaves. There's something outside of us determining what our life is going to look like. And that's the Jewish value of freedom. And on a personal level, that's what we are. We have to be free of anybody, and we have to be free of anything. And that's freedom. Next week, we'll learn about the Jewish value of ownership. Interesting. Fascinating class. In a certain way, it's my most favorite class of this course next week. We take a very mystical approach. We're going to bring in some mysticism next week, which is a little bit different for this course. And the journey continues. So I want to thank you for joining us, especially going overtime.
Thank you.
You get extra points for every minute over.